Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. My guest for this episode is John Lenahan. He's Associate Vice President of Published Content at ITHAKA, the nonprofit scholarly content and research provider. ITHAKA operates the JSTOR, ArtStore, Portico, and ITHAKA S&R platforms and services. Like many of us, ITHAKA is concerned about the affordable distribution of scholarly research, and this holds true for the monograph. Unlike its cousin, the journal article, monograph distribution models are much harder to set up and maintain, but there are many organizations like ITHAKA that are making headway in developing sustainable solutions. JSTOR's ebook program is celebrating its 10th year in operation, and in this episode, John and I discuss how the program has evolved to accommodate the growth in ebook usage, changes in collection policies, and where the ebook fits in the research workflow. Okay, John, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
All right. So to start, why don't you just tell us a little bit about yourself, your role at ITHAKA, and then just give us a brief backgrounder on the books at JSTOR platform.
Sure. So I'm the Associate Vice President of Published Content on JSTOR, responsible for publishing licensed and open content on the platform, which does include our Books at JSTOR program, and also managing our publisher relationships. So JSTOR, under the ITHAKA umbrella, is a not-for-profit with a mission to improve access to knowledge and preserve it for future generations. And we work real closely with libraries, publishers, and scholars to build our program, which we did with Books at JSTOR in 2011 and launched the program in 2012. Mm-hmm. And since that time, over the last 10 years, we've grown to now have over 110,000 titles from 300 academic publishers, and also have included 8,000 open access books in our program. So we're continuing to collaborate with the community on improvements for user experience, improvements towards library acquisition and workflows, and also finding ways of supporting more innovative open access models.
Excellent. Yeah. So like you mentioned, the books program is celebrating its 10-year anniversary now, and I'm wondering if you can kind of situate that program in the context of the ebook market, ebook monograph market, in terms of so maybe looking at how things were then and versus how things are now, in terms of how have acquisition and usage practices changed over that course of time?
Sure. I think I'll probably give a little bit reflection of like some situations that we're dealing with currently, and then I'll probably go back to like what it was like and roll that way.
Sure.
So basically, the demand for ebooks has increased dramatically due to the shift in remote teaching and learning during the pandemic. We've seen that the last few years in particular. So libraries are adopting to a hybrid sort of in-person online learning and ensuring that collections are available to distance learners. A lot more the last few years than we've seen in the past, especially when we launched the program. Many patrons who were previously preferred print monographs now appreciate and expect the convenience of ebooks. And the pandemic has really accelerated the print to digital shift that was already underway for monographs over the past decade, but really accelerated the last couple of years. So as libraries have faced budget cuts and uncertainty for over the last 10 years, it was happening before, but in particular the last 10 years here, they've increasingly turned to more usage-based models, such as demand-driven acquisition, evidence-based acquisition. And these models help libraries access a much broader range of materials than they otherwise could. And then they only acquire the titles that are used the most. So the spending that libraries are having on these titles are meeting the needs of the users at their institution. And they're not spending money on content that isn't having a demand or doesn't get used.
Right.
So also, the key thing we've been doing is trying to increase focus on equity and interest in lowering barriers to access for researchers around the world. and libraries really have been partnering with us and leading projects to develop new open access models to publish ebooks and make them freely accessible to anyone. With the increase of open access publishing, we are seeing some of the largest amount of ebook usage in countries that had little to no usage of licensed books.
Mm.
So this is in particular in countries in Asia, Africa, South America, that when we look at our data, institutions and countries as a whole have some of the highest overall usage of ebook content. That when we looked at that data prior, when everything was licensed, their usage was very minimal, mainly because they didn't have the budget to acquire the content. But it clearly showed when moved to open access, there was a demand from users in those countries. And in the international market, we provide institutions with usage data from open access ebooks from users at their institution. And in many cases, they're surprised to see that there's usage of the ebook content in the 8,000 open access ebooks I mentioned, as they're primarily in English. And countries that I'm referencing here in the international market, the native language is not English. And there's very little adoption of these books at the library or within the institution. So there's a big surprise that where they felt there was no demand, by looking at that data and making it available to users, they really see the building up of demand for ebook content.
Right. So you've kind of talked a little bit about how the books program has evolved along with those changes, but in 2015 specifically, JSTOR switched exclusively to unlimited DRM free access, which essentially matches the accessibility of journals on the platform. At that time, I'm just curious how discussions went with publishers at the time, because journals and monographs are just very different markets in that aspect in terms of opening up the content.
Yeah, it was a difficult decision. I actually let me go back a minute. When we first launched the program, I mentioned back in 2011, we were had done interviews and working a lot with libraries and building the model before we launched it.
Mm-hmm.
And in working with libraries, they felt we didn't see a whole lot of usage on ebook content. They were comfortable with single user models. They felt that that supported the demand that they might be expecting for ebook content.
Hmm.
And what we noticed very quickly is that faculty in particular, who were used to unlimited use access of journal content on JSTOR, started to have a poor experience by having limitations of the engagement they could be having with ebook content in a single user DRM related model. And so they began to express frustration over the user experience of ebook content. So we made a decision based on the feedback we started to have that we needed to move to a DRM free unlimited use model to replicate the experience that faculty students were having in using the journal content. And so we quickly reached out to publishers and indicated to them, this was back in 2015, that we were going to be moving to an unlimited use only model. And they reviewed that request very carefully as they concerns around ensuring sustainable revenues.
Mm-hmm.
But they were open to increasing the content that they made available in an unlimited use model, and in fact converted thousands of titles to a DRM free model once we eliminated that. And some of our partners continue to hold back on selected titles that have course use potential or trade potential from unlimited user models. But we have seen more publishers shifting to including a larger share of their titles, even including some that were course adopted or considered to be course adopted.
Mm-hmm.
We recently surveyed our publishers and found that they had become more comfortable placing titles in DRM-free models due to the demand from libraries and users. And in some cases, and we're seeing more and more of this now, that the increase of digital access has been leading to more print sales of those titles. And publishers have been seeing that and having more willingness to provide more discoverability of their book content in that format.
Oh, that's interesting. This might be a question just for me, but I mean, can you talk about sort of the relation between DRM free access and OA? Like, would there be sort of this natural next step for unlimited use to a title that's OA.
Now, when our OA program for JSTOR means that there is a CC BY license associated to it. So in this case, everything is DRM free on JSTOR, whether it's licensed or an open access ebook. But
Right.
with an open access ebook on JSTOR, it gives the user permissions to do more with that book outside of the JSTOR terms and conditions, whether that's through text and data mining. They want to be able to display that content in any way they want. They have a CC BY license that allows them to do that. They're not under the same constraints to do something more with that ebook once they've downloaded and taken it from JSTOR. I would see those as the real key differences between the DRM free and open access is the additional permissions an end user has with an open access book due to the CC BY license to do more with that content within courses, within sharing that information, etc.
Excellent. Okay, perfect. Yeah, I wanted to go back a little bit to you mentioned user experience and publishers sort of, warming up to that aspect of having books available on the platform. And one key breakthrough came when your user experience research group discovered readers weren't clicking through to the chapter level as much as you thought they would. Can you describe some of the findings from that team and the changes you made?
Sure. Again, at the beginning, research was showing us, and our initial reviews was that the users wanted to engage at the book level, and publishers were used to presenting on their own platforms or other partnerships at the book level. So at launch, we displayed search results at the book level. Usage data started to reveal that users were viewing the table of content pages, but they were not moving forward to read specific chapters. So we did interviews with users and found that they needed an easier way to go straight to the most relevant content for their research topic. So this chapter level approach aligned well with how monographs are used in teaching and learning, as specific chapters are usually assigned or referenced rather than an entire book being read cover to cover. And when we surface chapters instead of the full book in the search results, it was easier for users to discover and access the content. And immediately, once we started to do that, usage went up well over 600%. I mean, just like that. It completely changed the way users were engaging with ebook content, especially backlist content that was really not being discovered before, because they were engaging on backlist books and journals across in-depth research areas.
Right. Yeah, that's excellent. So following on to that, the chapter level metadata that you created seemed like a big leap forward in usability and discovery, to enable that jump in engagement. Was this done with input from publishers, or did you just kind of do that metadata development on your own? And can you describe how that all came together?
Sure. At the time the decision was made, most publishers were providing book level metadata.
Right.
So it required us to create our own specifications for dividing books into chapters, and then applying this across all books from all publishers. So we had consistency. This also required us to develop our own internal systems to support chapter level search and discovery and working with the discovery service providers. So we kind of indicated to publishers what we were doing, but they really didn't have the capability at that time to be able to support what we were doing with chapter level. With the immediate spike in usage and the positive reactions from the academic community, publishers were seeing the value on making chapters available and the increase of discoverability. And we started to see more publishers providing that chapter level metadata. They started to see the value of that apply not just for JSTOR, but for their own platforms and other partnerships. And our recent publisher survey showed that nearly all of our publishers felt that chapter level indexing and full text search on JSTOR increased the ability of their books to be discovered. Every time I talk with publisher and we get into the in-depth or detail of that, they reference the value that they see on JSTOR providing chapter level metadata, and it's still something that's very challenging for many of them to do. especially because we've gone all the way back to their full backlist runs, and publishers with thousands of titles can be costly to do that. In particular, that doing that has led to a really strong increase in usage of backlist books that are still relevant today, that without doing this would have been very difficult to find. And now these titles that are available in this format help support new generation of researchers that wouldn't have been able to really know these books existed or found them without the relevant chapter level metadata. And the adoption of this, kind of going back, you mentioned how the publishers were perceiving this. Now, in the beginning of 2021, we worked in collaboration with the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture to open up book chapters and journal articles to support the 95 books that are in the Black Liberation reading list. And large number of our publishers enthusiastically look to engage and partner with us to make specific chapters of books that were already available for sale, but making them available in an open access environment to support the reading list. So these publishers began seeing individual values of the chapters within published books that were supporting initiatives like this, which to me really showed the adoption and understanding of value that publishers were beginning to see.
Yep. Excellent. So one of the notable features of JSTOR books is the integration of journal articles with search results. This might seem like a silly question, but how does this combination benefit the research workflow? And then does it have any impact or influence on the discoverability of books in particular?
Yeah, so for many scholars in the humanities and social sciences, JSTOR is a starting point for research. We integrated ebook chapters with related journals and other types of content on one cross-searchable platform. So we're adding ebooks to an established research workflow that creates a rich discovery environment for researchers across disciplines that they were already engaging with from the journal content on JSTOR. And I bring up this example a lot because it was brought up to me by a librarian at the University of California, San Diego. And in one particular situation, they had a faculty member in the Renaissance Studies that really was opposed to using ebook content. The library was investing a lot into it. Faculty member wouldn't engage. But because the faculty students were heavy users of JSTOR on the journal content, because we have so many journals that support that particular discipline, they started to discover the backlist ebooks. And all of a sudden, the faculty members started to see the students using references of the ebooks within their work. And that faculty member quickly then became an adopter of ebook content and started to incorporate that into their courses. So the librarian mentioned, wow, we never had this experience when these books were presented on their own or in another format, but when combined with journal content, it completely changed the way users and faculty are engaging with content, the ebook content.
Excellent. So a quick question sort of on the institutional side. I'm wondering, anecdotally, I guess, and probably quantitatively, large research institutions tend to lead the way in driving increased OA investment, sort of on the buy side. How have you made it easier for smaller institutions to participate in OA acquisition and participate in the JSTOR books program? And then likewise on the publisher side, same thing for smaller publishers. I mean, how are you helping them to work with your models?
Most of the 8,000 books that are on JSTOR, the open access books that are already published on JSTOR, most of those have been covered either directly through the costs have been covered either directly through JSTOR or through the publishers. So we haven't really asked a lot for institutions to cover the funding of the open access books that have been published. We did work in a pilot that was kind of looking at on a publish to open environment where we were trying to, work with libraries that mainly larger libraries where they already had paying for the print content. And so they're moving the print budget they already had allocated over to supporting open access publishing. This was an initiative that was really led through a library community, the Latin Americanist Research Resources Project, or LARP. And they were working with publisher Claxco in Argentina. And they really were looking for long-term preservation and expansion of open access publishing. So because the large libraries, the large research institutions, I should say, they only had to reallocate budget they already had for print to electronic. The smaller institutions really didn't need to put in any additional funding to support that. But what we learned in that process was we needed to create a tiered model to where smaller institutions looking to contribute would pay much lower contribution fees than a larger institution. And so through that pilot and collaboration library community, we did develop a tiered model for expanding this in the future. And we've had a lot of experience of doing that within JSTOR because we have a Reveal Digital, which really uses the same kind of tier model for academic institutions to provide the funding for us to publish special collections in an open access environment.
What are the characteristics in that influence the tier model? What are the models based on?
In most cases, we were still kind of looking at this off of not from the reveal, but from the pilot with working with LARP that I mentioned.
Yeah.
It was really looking at JSTOR, the same structure that JSTOR does and for archive journal participation, because that was looking a lot towards Carnegie classification, really trying to understand like what libraries' budget acquisitions are, the size of the library. So we felt we had good JSTOR classification tiers already in place,
right.
But then the contribution for open access was going to be a lot smaller. We had the starting point of what we felt a large research library would contribute, which was really a reallocation in many cases of print. And then that scaled down to smaller institutions who probably would have never been purchasing the print books to begin with, but see really strong value of having access to that ebook content and want to contribute to further publication.
Got it. Okay. So sustainability, from the perspective of libraries, users, and publishers, is a crucial aspect of any access model. Looking ahead, where do you see models further evolving to maintain that sustainability, and support users and publishers as ebook acquisition and usage continues to grow?
So I see us continuing to work closely with the library and publishing community, like we did in the beginning, coming out with the demand-driven, evidence-based acquisition models that are aligning to changes in library budgets. You have to be adaptable and adjust acquisition models to the changes that are occurring with the library budgets. And just like I mentioned earlier, what we've seen change the last 2 to 3 years, we have to anticipate we're going to see more changes like that in the future. More support for electronic content, more ways of where ebook acquisitions are going and changing within library workflows. So it's important for us also to keep publishing costs as low as possible. We're never seeing libraries are having more money and more budget to spend on more content. It's usually less budget and they need more content. So we've got to be able to leverage technology, keep costs down, and do that in a way that's sustainable for our publishers and doesn't make it where it's not sustainable for libraries to continue to participate in ebook acquisitions. I think in that area as well, we want to show the pathways for users of books into other scholarly content, like journals, research reports, special collections. So they're seeing the value that ebooks are having in discovering really specific topics across multiple content types. And we're going to continue to make investments into data and data distribution to libraries and publishers so they can understand the trends of usage and start to develop and collaborate on opportunities where that data might be pointing to it. And the last thing I'll state on this, it's been important for us, especially the last few years, is working in partnership with acquisition workflows with partners such as ProQuest and EBSCO, whether it's through Gobi or Oasis Rialto, and whatever those acquisition models may really move into in the future, that we know that we're partnering there and making it as easy for libraries that however they acquire content, we can make sure that they have an option to choose those acquisitions from our platform.
Excellent. Well, perfect. Well, John, that's all we have time for. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today.
Thank you very much for having me. Really appreciate talking about it.
You just heard from John Lenahan, Associate Vice President of Published Content at ITHAKA, the nonprofit scholarly content and research provider. I'm Bill Mickey, the Editorial Director at Choice. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager, Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced and edited by Choice's digital media producer, Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.